Welcome to my Niamh Story channel. Celine is the most important person in Evan's heart. She is gentle and beautiful, and she once saved his life. I am just a substitute who looks like her. Therefore, when Celine said she was in trouble, Evan didn't hesitate to push me out of the way. He felt that since I looked like her, it was only natural that I should help. But he didn't know that Celine's trouble was very tricky. I tried my best to make the last call, but he hung up easily. At that time, he was having a candlelight dinner with Celine. Our story officially begins. I hope you like it. The alley was quiet, only the sound of footsteps echoing. I ran. The alley was quiet, only the sound of footsteps echoing. I ran in a panic, the chase having lasted all afternoon. At first, he recklessly crashed into my car, then abandoned it and chased after me. I was running out of energy, my legs heavy as lead. My phone, which had been having trouble getting a signal, suddenly responded. I was overjoyed and immediately called my emergency contact. Just hang in there, I've already called Evan Hale, you still have hope. I encouraged myself mentally, not daring to slow down. However, the next second, the voice that came from the receiver sent me plummeting into a cold abyss. I'm sorry, the number you have dialed cannot be connected at this time. I paused, feeling the sound of footsteps behind me getting closer and closer. The dead end was just ahead. Celine Roy, hurry up and come here. The roar of the mob rang in my ears, and with a flash of cold light, the dagger pierced my chest. Blood gushed from my chest and spread to the ground as I slid to the ground. The screen went out after a long period of inactivity, and my life came to an end. In fact, I am not Celine. The reason I am here is because Evan told me that I look like Celine and that I can help her out of a little trouble. When I woke up in severe pain, I found myself floating in the air. There was no doubt that I had completely died and become a ghost. This seems to be some kind of high-end restaurant. As I wondered why I was there, I suddenly saw two familiar figures and couldn't help but be startled. The woman looked very much like me and was having a pleasant conversation with the man opposite, looking very happy and even raising a glass in celebration when she got excited. What a perfect match, except that the man opposite was my boyfriend. Despite my heartache, I walked over to him. He also seemed to be enjoying the dinner, gazing tenderly at the woman opposite with a look of adoration that I rarely saw in his eyes. His phone was quietly resting on the table, and the faint light reflected on the tablecloth seemed to indicate that he had been getting messages. But he didn't pay any attention. The woman sitting across from him said coquettishly, "Thank you, Mr. Hale, for taking time out of your busy schedule to have dinner with me. Your phone has been ringing non-stop all night, and I'm sure you've missed a lot." Evan put down his knife and fork, smiled at her, and said, "Nothing is more important than having dinner with you. You can see that I haven't even looked at my phone tonight." The woman across from him smiled slightly at the corner of her mouth. "I invited you to this dinner to thank you for convincing Lena Finn and also for helping me deal with those troublesome matters. But she seems a little upset, Evan, is she angry?" Evan said without hesitation, "It's okay, she looks like you, it's only right that she helps you with some things when you're busy. She's done it a few times before. If she's angry, it's because she doesn't know any better." As I listened to her explain so casually, I felt full of grievance and anger. "Evan, am I just a tool that looks like Celine in your eyes? Do you know how serious the trouble Celine was talking about this time is? Do you know that I was seriously injured in the alley, bleeding profusely and in pain? Do you know that? Just now, I almost had an accident and called you for help, but you hung up, and it was the last time I would ever call you. You were having a candlelit dinner with Celine." After dinner, Evan walked Celine to her car before going home. On the way home, he took out his phone to deal with the unreturned messages, and he saw my missed call. He frowned and thought about it for 2 seconds before finally calling me back. However, there was never an answer at the other end of the line. Yes, it was obviously impossible to answer. He probably thought I was throwing another tantrum, and his frown grew even deeper. After trying a few times without a response, he turned off his phone and returned home in silence. Upon returning home and seeing an empty house, he was even more convinced that I was throwing a tantrum, so he went straight to wash up and rest, ignoring everything else. The next day, Evan got up and checked his phone, only to find that I still hadn't replied. He grabbed his hair and muttered to himself, as if he was thinking. He clicked on my chat box, held down the voice button, and said in an annoyed tone, "Stop sulking and hurry back." "But Evan, I will never come back. Ever since you made me deal with all that trouble for Celine, I was doomed never to return." After sending the voice message, Evan put his phone aside. In his mind, the girlfriend not answering the phone was nothing, let alone delaying today's work. As he walked to the door, I saw him glance hurriedly at the message board and his steps faltered. On it was the little note I had written when I left yesterday. Although I had been reluctant to do so, I had prepared dinner for Evan and reminded him to reheat it and be careful with his stomach. Yesterday, he hadn't noticed the note, and it had been sitting there all alone all day. Today, when he found it, the food in the fridge was no longer edible. I smiled wryly. Over the years I had been with him, this sort of thing had happened almost every day. I was attracted to him the first time I saw him. At that time, he was silent and handsome, exuding an elite temperament in every move, but inadvertently revealing a sense of vulnerability, making people can't help but want to know more. So, when I found that he noticed me among the crowd, I was so excited, like winning the lottery, unable to suppress my inner joy. I ran over directly and asked him, "Do you like me?" However, his reply made me feel disappointed. "Miss, I don't know you, the only reason I noticed you is because you look like my rescuer." My common sense told me to back off, but the passion of love at that time made me fearless. "So may I ask, do you have a boyfriend now? Or does your rescuer have any thoughts of developing the relationship further?" I didn't realize until much later that Celine was enjoying a prosperous life at that time and simply could not have such extreme thoughts. Moreover, Evan was very submissive towards her, so naturally she didn't want to focus on him. Therefore, Evan's eyes revealed a hint of loss, but he still didn't say anything. "That's good, then. I want to court you." I was young and confident, thinking that true love was invincible, and decided to go all out to court Evan. I prepared different meals for him every day and tried hard to deliver them, just to catch a few more glances of him. But he threw the food away in front of me, bluntly telling me not to harbor any delusions, that he would never like me. I did a lot of work for him, all night long, just hoping that he would praise me. But at the project celebration dinner, he called everyone except me, the one who had given the most. His friends knew there was a girl who kept after him, and they all wanted to see her, so he took the initiative to contact me for the first time. I was very happy to go to him, but I was stopped by the doorman and had to wait in the rain all night. Many times, I thought he would never talk to me again. But one day, he called me when he was very drunk. I rushed over and heard him say, "Let's get together." That moment was the happiest moment of my life. I was so happy that I could pretend not to know that it was the day Celine left for the States, and I could ignore the Celine he mentioned in a whisper. At that time, I always thought that if I was good to him, and even better, if I was good to him for a long time, he would eventually like me a little. But then, until the moment of the sting, he only cared about Celine. And I was just a silent substitute. After a day's work, Evan opened his phone again. My chat box was still blank, and he was a little anxious, so he called his assistant and asked if Lena had contacted me in the past few days. To be honest, even when he and I were unhappy in the past, I would quietly ask my assistant to keep an eye on him, worrying that he would skip meals and stay up late working when he was busy. But this time, the assistant shook her head with difficulty and said that Miss Finn really hadn't contacted him recently. Evan frowned and said, then help me push back this afternoon's schedule, I'll go in person. Before he could finish speaking, a small figure appeared in the office like the wind, without even knocking on the door, which was enough to show that she was familiar with the owner of the place. She was Celine. As soon as Celine entered, Evan immediately told his assistant to contact Lena again if there were no other matters in the afternoon. Celine casually sat on the sofa, propped her chin in her hand, and said coquettishly, "What's the matter? Why has everyone forgotten that we're going to go to the exhibition together this afternoon?" Evan straightened his collar, thinking to himself where he could have forgotten, but he still smiled and said, "It's just some trivial things, and being with you is the most important thing." I closed my eyes and thought to myself, I've been out of contact for 2 days, so the situation must not be good. Evan said that being with Celine was the most important thing, and the things related to me were just trivial matters. Celine was very happy to hear this, intimately took Evan's arm, leaned her head on his shoulder and said coquettishly, "Then let's go now, I'm a little hungry." Evan smiled sweetly and was about to respond when Celine's gaze was caught by something and she let out an exaggerated intake of breath. I followed her gaze and saw that she was staring at a string of red jade Buddhist beads in Evan's hand. She asked curiously, "Evan, where did this come from?" "This was blessed by a famous master and I heard that it can protect people's health and safety." Evan didn't hesitate to put the string of beads on her hand after hearing this. I felt a little uneasy. I had gone to a lot of trouble to beg for this string of beads. Once, I went to a temple and heard that the string of beads blessed by the master there was very effective and could protect people's safety. I immediately decided to beg for a string of beads for Evan, but the master flatly refused, telling me, "Little girl, you and this person don't have a connection in this life, so it's useless to beg. Just go back." But how could I be willing? For his sake, I was willing to give everything. So I bowed to the master, with all sincerity, hoping for a result. I could see my lover's heart day and night. The master said we didn't have a connection in this life, so I stayed there, bowing to the gods and Buddhas every day, praying that they would grant me a little connection, until my sincerity could move the heavens. I stayed there for 7 whole days. I had walked the road up to the temple countless times. Every time, I was filled with sincerity, and I was careful not to make any mistakes. Everyone who saw me praised me, saying that I had such a great wish and was so pious. But only I understood that at that time, my only wish was for him to be safe and healthy, and for us to be together for a long time. I just wanted to be with him forever. After 7 days, the master looked at me with a sigh and finally handed me the bracelet. As I closed the door, I heard him whisper 3 words, "Don't force it." At this moment, my carefully crafted bracelet was worn by Evan to Celine's hand, and she praised her for looking good. My heart felt like it was being stabbed, and I felt incredibly uncomfortable. Evan, what a disappointment. As they were about to leave, someone stopped them in their tracks. Seeing her face, my heart ached, and it was my best friend, Mira Tate. She was flushed with anger, which reached a peak when she saw Celine. "Lena hasn't been able to get in touch with me for a few days, and Mr. Hale is here chatting up the pretty one, which really annoys me." Evan's face immediately turned gloomy. "Mira, can you please speak more gently? Lena's sulking and not getting in touch with me, there's nothing I can do about it. Am I supposed to go looking for her everywhere? I don't have the time for that, and she's not worth it." Mira was so angry that she almost jumped up. "Lena's mistake was to spoil you like this. She worried about you and gave everything she had, but you said she wasn't worthy. I've never seen anyone treat their lover like you," Mira said, glancing at the bracelet on Celine's hand. Suddenly, she rushed excitedly to Celine's side, grabbed her wrist, and asked, "Where did this come from? Lena obviously begged for it." Evan crossed his arms and snorted, retorting, "So what if she begged for it? Since she gave it to me, I can give it to whoever I want." Mira was so angry that she wanted to take the bracelet from Celine's hands, but Evan stopped her. She could only yell at him, "Do you know how much Lena suffered to get this bracelet? How many times did she fall on that mountain path? In the end, she had to be helped down the mountain, and her knees were bruised for months, and they still hurt. But you just gave it to someone else, and that really makes people feel uncomfortable." Evan said coldly, "This is my stuff, I can give it to whoever I want. If it weren't for Celine saving me in the water, I might not even be alive now. She's my savior, it's not too much to give her anything. By the way, if you see Lena, just tell her not to think about it anymore." Mira was so angry that her eyes were red. Self-absorbed? She loves and cares for you, but you call her self-absorbed? Mr. Hale, I can tell you that you will be hard-pressed to meet someone as sincere as her in this life. After saying this, she seemed to notice what Evan had just said, and her gaze swept over Celine before she let out a somewhat strange smile. "If you have time, Mr. Fong, please get your eyesight checked. It's okay to mistake things, but if people make mistakes, that's trouble. I'm going to go find Lena, goodbye," Mira said, and Celine's expression became a little unnatural. As soon as Mira left, Evan thought she was scared and hurriedly asked after her, but Celine made an excuse and left. Seeing her reaction like that, I couldn't help but feel puzzled. After that day, Evan began to desperately search for me. He had no close family, so he could only contact my friends and classmates, but no matter who he called, he couldn't get any news of me. That morning, after calling my phone as usual and getting no response, Evan's emotions reached a boiling point. Instead of going to work, he devoted all his energy to searching every corner of the house, as if he wanted to find me. The house was big, but it was empty and couldn't give him any response. He was so tired that he sat on the floor, but then he noticed something on the bedside table and his spirits immediately lifted. I saw that it was the key to my cubicle. It was a small house that I had worked hard for many years to buy. When I bought it, I thought, I have been alone for so long, finally I have a home, and Evan is my only family. So I handed the key to Evan like a treasure, but he didn't care at all and casually threw it aside. Until the day I died, he only went there a few times after repeated requests. He was especially excited when he got the key, his eyes sparkled with hope, and he hurriedly ran out. Opening the house that had not been lived in for a long time, an unpleasant smell came towards him. After making sure that no one was there, Evan felt a sense of disappointment. However, the furnishings of the house soon caught his attention. "This is the house I designed for being a writer, full of the imagination of our lives together. I put 2 pairs of slippers by the door, one for men and one for women. The fragrance in the bathroom is his favorite, which I specially chose for him. On the wall hang the works of his favorite avant-garde artists." During the few times we spent together in the past, he never noticed these details. However, after I left, he finally saw a silent and profound part of me. "It's not worth it, Lena," I thought to myself. But Evan was like a kid in a candy store. I looked closer and saw that it was a keychain we had bought together on a beach holiday. I don't usually buy souvenirs like this, but the guy at the stall kept praising us when he saw us, saying we were a perfect match and that we should buy a pair to wish each other a happy marriage. I paid for it right away, carefully watching Evan's expression. I was surprised that he didn't show any impatience, but instead nodded slightly. I was so happy about that for a long time. But I never saw him wear that keychain. And mine is here, too, and the pair that the vendor talked about is now separated and can never be complete again. Evan carefully took it this time, but it was already too late. Evan was unusually drunk. I knew it was his birthday. Although I no longer loved him, everything about him was still deeply etched in my mind and impossible to forget. In the past, his birthday was very important to me, and I would prepare for it in advance every year. This year was no different, but I had only just started when the thug killed me. Now Evan was faced with the empty room, without the scene I had carefully set up for him. He seemed unable to accept this reality, and cancelled all his invitations for the evening, drinking alone at home. I heard him whisper Lena. The sound of high heels broke the silence, and a hurried person walked up to him. It was Celine. Evan subconsciously walked closer, called out Lena, then realized it was wrong and quickly took a step back to keep his distance from her, politely asking, Celine, what can I do for you? Celine looked very anxious, but still pretended to be calm and said, what else could it be for? Of course it's to wish you a happy birthday. Lena, really, sulking for so long, leaving you here alone for your birthday? Evan interrupted her unhappily, saying that Lena was just sulking with me and would be back soon. He seemed to muster up the courage and continued, I've been meaning to ask you for a few days now. Lena lost contact after you did that night. Is there any chance that something happened to her? Celine's face changed instantly, but she quickly laughed and said, how could that be? I was busy with other things that day, that's why I asked Lena for help. I met the person that day a few days ago, everything is fine, don't worry. Evan looked at her quietly, his piercing gaze making Celine feel uneasy. She found an excuse and got up to leave. But surprisingly, soon after, Celine's phone rang again. Her voice was hurried and panicked, completely unlike her usual lazy self. She spoke with a hint of pleading in her voice, Evan, let's be together, right now. Let's travel the world together, just get out of here. I knew Evan had been waiting a long time to hear those words. Being with Celine had always been his dream, and now he had fulfilled that wish, but he didn't look happy at all. He sat quietly with the phone in his hand for a long time, and when Celine and I on the other end of the line couldn't hold back any longer, he finally said, Celine, I'm glad you chose me, but I have to say no. During this time, I finally understood my own feelings. I love Lena, it's always been her. As for you, I'm just grateful for your help, but I can't promise anything else. After saying this, he suddenly felt very happy, and was filled with joy, not even noticing Celine's angry tone. Don't be smug, Evan, you'll never get Lena. He seemed not to have heard, lost in his own emotions, he began to walk around the room. After he left, the room's furnishings did not change. Evan picked up the items one by one, stroked them gently, wiped them, with a smile on his face, as if remembering something happy. I was familiar with this situation. In the past, when I was with him, I always felt incredibly fulfilled, and I treasured anything and everything related to him. Now, he has finally begun to love me, just as I love him, but I feel an emptiness inside. I have lost everything, and I have lost myself. Evan's deep feelings came too late and were meaningless. Perhaps God couldn't bear to watch any longer, and soon the shrill ring of a phone interrupted his fragile dream. He answered the phone and heard a rough male voice. My heart immediately started pounding, and my intuition told me that this call had something to do with me. Sure enough, the voice said, Evan, you kid really know how to play false tricks. Evan hadn't reacted yet, and the voice continued, you found a fake Celine to replace her and protect the real one. Not bad. If that woman hadn't come running here yesterday, I almost fell for it. Evan felt like he had been struck by lightning. He could not process this sentence in his mind, and instinctively asked, what did you say? Can you explain it a little more clearly? From the description on the other end of the phone, I slowly pieced together the truth. It turned out that the big boss that Celine had followed in her early years had recently run into trouble, and she hurried back to China to try to get out of it. However, she had followed the big boss for many years and had developed a serious gambling addiction, and she could never control herself. Moreover, the big boss's opponents were also deliberately guiding her, and as a result, she had already accumulated a huge debt. At this point, she began to target Evan and me, trying to make the boss's rivals think that I was Celine. She hoped that after I was killed by them, I would start a new life with a new identity and contact Evan again to pay off the debt, so that she could appear in public with a clean slate. But she didn't expect Evan to reject her, and Celine's gambling addiction had gotten out of control, and she couldn't resist going to the casino, so she was caught by her creditors. It's so sad that my life has been involved in this kind of thing. The man on the other end of the phone kept talking. This woman owes me a lot of money. If you still want her, pay up quickly, otherwise, I'm not someone to mess with. Suddenly there was a loud thud from his end, followed by Celine's miserable screams echoing through the room, making people cringe. Did you hear that? If you don't pay up, she'll continue to suffer. Evan ignored the rest and asked hoarsely, "Where is she?" Laughter came from the other end of the line. You really don't let go of your old loves, but unfortunately, you have to prepare for the funeral of that little beauty. This is not generally known, but you've come to the right person. I can tell you, but it will cost extra. Evan's face turned red, and his veins stood out. I'll pay you whatever you want, just tell me where she is. What about the one next to me? Evan said with clenched teeth and a cold voice, as you wish. Wild cats and stray dogs were prowling around my body, and flies and mosquitoes were buzzing around. Even though I was prepared for this, the scene still shocked me. I had suffered a lot during my life, and after I died, my soul wandered around the world, but no one cared about my corpse. I only ended up in this situation because I loved him. Evan stumbled towards my body, which was already unrecognizable in its disfigured state, but he searched carefully until he saw my knee. There were the scars from the prayer beads I had made for him. At that moment, he finally let out a loud cry of grief, and I realized that when people are in extreme grief, their cries almost sound like the growl of a beast. The crying stopped abruptly when Mira arrived. She looked thinner than before. Her red eyes gave Evan a slap directly in the face. Just as she was about to scold him, she saw me lying on the ground, and she couldn't hold back her tears anymore. Lena, how could this happen? You obviously love beauty the most. She cried for a long time, wanting to argue with Evan again but unable to muster the energy. She could only keep blaming him. Evan, meanwhile, was only concerned with his own thoughts, staring intently at my corpse and ignoring everything around him. Mira cried herself out, dried her tears, and took on a firm attitude, as if she were about to deliver a heavy blow to Evan. Evan, listen, there's something I have to tell you, and even though it's pointless to say it, I'm going to say it anyway. Evan remained silent. Mira continues, after I went to look for you that day, I noticed that Celine's face looked strange, so I looked into it a bit. Guess what I found out? The person you thought rescued you from the water was actually someone who can't swim at all. I saw Evan's expression waver a bit, as if a crack had appeared. Mira then asks with a smirk of revenge, so guess, the person who saved you was the face you can't forget. Who was it? Ha ha ha, what a surprise. Evan, you really can't see people's hearts, you only see the surface. My memory returned to a long time ago with Myra's guidance. It was a summer day. I was daydreaming by the reservoir when I suddenly heard someone shouting for help. I quickly went over to check, and fortunately he was only tangled in waterweed around his feet. I untangled the waterweed and pulled him to shore. Then I heard my friend calling my name. After making sure the person who called for help was not in danger, I left quickly. The sun was blinding that day, and I forgot what the person looked like, but he remembered. Evan remembered my face from that fleeting glance. Years later, he saw two familiar faces, but he didn't recognize the person who had actually saved him. Evan's face was full of despair, as he cried holding my dead body, while I was full of disdain. I may have forgotten the past, but Evan has been remembering it all these years. If he really wanted to understand, how could he have been blinded for so long, not even knowing the real situation with Celine? The truth was right in front of him, but he just didn't want to uncover it, admit that he was wrong, or watch years of feelings go down the drain. He has been standing by, allowing Celine and those around him to hurt me again and again. Myra's appearance exposed this lie and made him face the truth. It was time to end it. He cried for a long time, and finally carefully put me down, with a smile on the corner of his mouth and deep affection in his eyes. If you ignore the cold look on my face, and just look at his actions, you might mistake him for trying to coax his lover to sleep, afraid of disturbing my beautiful dreams. He opened his phone and made a call. His voice sounded cold. I'll pay you whatever you want. Just tell me where you are. Don't let her go. I have more questions for you. This was a remote abandoned warehouse, a place that few people in the city paid attention to. It was dark and damp, just like the alley where I had been killed before, as if it were a hotbed of evil. This was where Celine was being held. Her appearance was no longer glamorous. Her clothes were worn and torn, and her body was covered in scars. She looked like she was on her last legs. The moment Evan appeared, a spark of hope shone in her eyes, but then it was extinguished. The man who had always obeyed her was in a terrible mood. His first words were, "How long have you been hiding this from me?" She knew in her heart that Evan would not let him off the hook, so she shouted, "Oh? So you know now. It seems you're not completely stupid. But what's the point of knowing? Lena is dead. Even if I die, I'll take someone with me. By the way, I'll tell you, Lena called you before she died. Do you remember? It was that day, we were having a candlelit dinner, ha ha ha." Evan's fists flew at Celine like a storm. He was so furious that his punches were all over the place, but each one carried full force. Celine screamed in pain and begged for mercy. "Stop, I really can't take it anymore. I can be Lena's stand-in. Please don't kill me. Isn't this face the one you love? She can be my stand-in, and I can be hers." Evan shouted, "Shut up. I won't allow you to insult her, you culprit who caused Lena's death. It's all because of you that Lena is dead, you murderer." As soon as he finished speaking, his fist landed even harder, shocking the kidnappers next to him. Celine spoke with difficulty under such an attack. "Did I kill Lena? You were the one who let her go. She loved you so much over the years, but you listened to me instead. How could you do that? This is all your fault, you're the one who killed her." Evan's hand froze upon hearing this, and Celine took the opportunity to struggle. Her wrist hit the ground, and it seemed like something had snapped. Then the string of red jade beads scattered on the ground. The string broke, and so should this marriage. The sound of the jade breaking seemed to take all the strength out of Evan. He stopped hitting Celine and instead concentrated on picking up the beads. His hands trembled so badly that he had to pick up each bead several times before he could steady it. It took a long time, but he finally managed to collect all the beads. At this point, Celine was also out of breath and no longer had the energy to provoke Evan, and Evan didn't even look at her again. He called the kidnapper, who was very interested in him, and said, "Kid, not bad. I almost want to invite you to join us." Evan didn't respond, but said directly, "As long as you pay, can you do anything?" The kidnapper replied, "Of course." Evan continued, "Very well, you set the price. I only have 2 things to do. First, find the woman and the person who killed Lena. I want their lives. Second, don't let them die too easily." The kidnapper was delighted to hear this and said he would definitely do a good job. Evan, however, showed no emotion. After giving his instructions, he returned to the alley. My body still lay there quietly, the dagger in the corner gleaming silver. He gently lifted me up, opened my hands and placed the beads in them, then closed them with his own hands. I heard him whisper, "Lena, I love you. Can you forgive me? If you can't answer me now, I'll come and ask you." In an instant, I saw him pick up the dagger on the ground, the weapon that had taken my life, and plunge it into his chest. I felt as if something had changed around me, as if my whole soul had become light and warm, as if it were about to fly away. I had finally found release. This was a real goodbye, Evan, and we would never meet again, in this life or in any other.